See, and when you're a CEO, you have an employment agreement, which means you can be let go. When you are an emperor, you own the operation, right? Right? Divinely inspired. Rob and I have worked together for 25 years or more, which has been kind of interesting, so we can finish each other's sentences. First off, I lived in Westford, Vermont for a couple of years. That's where I first did carpentry. And the house I built looks like it's where someone first learned carpentry. And I do remember, this is true, it was 1971, and I called the Motor Vehicle Bureau, and I was raised in the Bronx, and the commissioner answered the phone. That's when I knew I wasn't in New York City anymore, okay? No, Vermont is one beautiful state. Actually, Vermont is one of the most beautiful states from corner to corner. There's no like sort of toxic waste dump, or if there is, I missed it. And I've been to a lot of the places that you have come from. I'm thrilled to have you here because this is really kind of what we are, what we're about. In fact, we're in our international building right now. To wit, after this meeting, we're going to have, I'll meet with some of you in there. Meeting the Education Minister of Korea is coming with 9 of his troops. We had the Education Minister of Singapore here last week. This is self-invited, by the way. So we have hosted, self-invited, in the last 2.5 years, we've met with the Education Ministers of China, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Taiwan, New Zealand, Netherlands, Denmark, Israel, Jordan, UK, Kenya, South Africa, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. And the thing about that is, like this meeting, what I really like about it the most is that all of us in those meetings are trying to cooperate and learn from each other. And the discourse, at least in the United States, that we're preparing our kids to compete, and if you go into the U.S. Department of Education, there's actually in bold letters right where you enter, it says we're preparing our kids to compete. I don't think we're preparing our kids to compete. I think we're preparing our kids to cooperate, and that's what I love about the sector that we are all working in, is that we are truly doing that. I don't sense anything competitive about any of these conversations that we've ever been having over the last few years. So I want to say a little bit about how I got here, and in part how Rob got here, so you get the context in which we're talking about some of these things. Actually, I teach a class here at a grad school and also at Berkeley called New School Creation. To my knowledge, it's the only class in the 1,150 ed schools in the United States that people actually have a course on how to start a school, which is interesting because there's a lot of people starting schools right now. And new school creation and present school recreation are actually two sides of the same coin, frankly. What I did was, I was living in Vermont, and I had majored in film at college, and I made a documentary film about Vermont State Prison in Windsor, which resulted in it being closed. Instead of realizing the power of film, I decided to go to law school to study prisoners' rights. And so I did. And I worked as a carpenter to support myself. And my son, who was just here for his sister, I was unmarried single dad at the early age of 23 in northern Vermont, living in a little cabin. And he came down for his younger sister's graduation on Saturday from High Tech High, my last one to go through this place. And when I went to law school, I supported myself as a carpenter because in law school, actually, anybody here go to law school? Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to take a chance on this, okay? If your life depended on getting through law school and you could do one of 3 things and none of the other 2, okay? Would you go to the classes, would you read the cases, or would you be in a study group? Study group, right? Everyone says that. And that's very informative about what we do in education. And this is like a big study group, actually, right? So I was in study groups, and actually there's somebody who got his early MacArthur Award from working up at Berkeley, where he was a PhD candidate in the 60s, and found out that at elite levels of math at Berkeley, in the upper echelon of math, there were Anglo students, there were Latino students, there were Asian students, and African American students were falling off the cliff, and he wondered why. And as a budding sort of ethnographer that he didn't know he was, he moved into the dorms and realized that they didn't have study groups, and then he created study groups, and then they started doing as well. That was Yuri Treisman, whose website is Agile Mind, really cool guy. And then I got a job which is really the main thing, right after law school, teaching carpentry, first at Harvard Psychiatric Hospital, which was rather interesting, and with special ed kids. And I did that for a couple of years, and that was a residential hospital. And the kids, for the inner city kids, I was raised in the Bronx myself, were the kids that were most compelling to me. And this is when Boston was at the height of desegregation in the Boston public schools. For those of you who don't know it, a lot of you from other places have probably read about what happened down south in the United States in the 60s. Well, it also happened up north. And I saw people throwing bricks at babies and buses up in Boston during those years. And I've studied deseg, and I care a lot about these issues of deseg. And I had working class kids, taught carpentry for 11 years. And they came from all over the city because that was the point of forced busing. And a lot of them were juvenile hall related. And I realized the very first day that I was working with them that they were every bit as bright as the middle class kids I was in law school with. And the arc of my career for the last 35 years have been about questioning why these kids are over here and those kids are over there. So at High Tech High, the way that we accept kids is by a blind, zip code-based, postal code-based lottery. This year, sadly, we had 8,600 kids in the lottery for several hundred openings. And that is sad. And however, if you were to look at the lottery, you would see, and you were to buy, there's no transcript, there's no letter of recommendation, we don't know if you have special needs, we don't want to know any of that. We only know what postal code you live in. And we look at the 109 postal codes in the metropolitan area, and we find out from the census data from the federal government what percent of students reside in every code, and we have an algorithm where the computer selects that percent of kids for every grade that we have an opening. It will pick a student who is a sibling from an underrepresented zip code if there's an opening over a non-sibling, but it will never pick a sibling from a fully represented zip code, okay? Which means that there's a lot of siblings that don't get in, and there's a lot of unhappiness about that, and we don't do this to make people unhappy. Those of us who are employees, however, since we've had a 16% decline in pupil expenditure in California since we opened and pretty much have had no raises for years for anybody, one benefit for us all is that our kids get in automatically. So if you work here, so you get a nice K-12 education. So my second child went here and graduated 4 years ago, and he is a senior at Berkeley, majoring in physics and film. And I asked him if that's because they both start with F. And he is working on an organic food farm on the East Coast this summer, so he told me he is a triple F, farming, film, and physics. And my daughter just graduated, my last one, and having one's own kids in the school really obviously makes a very big difference. And I want to be careful, I don't know how to say this the best way, but I would like to say that it is as important for my kids to be going to school with kids who are different than them as I think it is for those kids to be going to school with my kids. And the beauty of we just had 11 graduations. They just ended yesterday with our grad school. And I chose to speak at the graduation about why I moved here 15 years ago, and I lived in Cambridge, I had a job, and my house was paid off, and my family's there, my friends are there, and I came here and took a flyer on doing this with my wife, and my kids were then 7 and 3, my youngest kids, and just before we were landing, I had a little bit of anxiety about, why am I doing this? Why am I coming to this? I don't know anything about this. By the way, like most of the people in the United States have this sort of blend of envy and disdain about California, right? And it took me 4 minutes to totally fall in love with it, and I'm not leaving, by the way. But I talked about my mother, who met my dad in World War II in Italy, and they got married, and she came over on a troop ship to Virginia Beach, pregnant with my older sister, not knowing a word of English, coming to a country that she had never been to before, and knowing absolutely nobody. And I thought about her as we were landing. I thought, this isn't so bad. I got a job, I got a place where I live. And so I wanted to acknowledge the diverse range of families that I saw in front of me, because we had thousands of people here over this weekend. in graduation after graduation. And in the United States, there's an ugly nativism that's going on about immigration, which is really a shame because everybody, even Native Americans, came here from someplace else. By the way, Rosecrans is the street that goes right over here. It's a big street right here. Rosecrans is the first path that any European ever walked on in the entire west coast of this continent. Just a little FYI. Cabrillo landed just a few hundred yards from here in the early 1500s and walked down that path. Just a little bit of history, okay? So the most important, I was in a meeting here with the faculty, and somebody said, what's the most core belief that you feel is non-negotiable? And to me, I said, social class integration. It really is. So that means a couple of things. You already know how they get here. That's one thing. The other thing we do is we don't segregate them once they get here. It's a cohort model. And it's really tempting to segregate them, and a lot of people think we should, but we don't. And being a special ed teacher for all those years, we don't have pull-out. We have, if you want to work individually with a student, you do it in the morning, you do it at lunch, you do it after school. If you want to work with a student during the day, you work with them in their classroom and the group of students around them. So basically nobody is treated differently unless, as we said about special ed law when it first arose, which arose in Massachusetts in 1976, sometimes you need to treat people differently in order to treat them equally. That's a different matter. So what about honors? In order to get into selective colleges, and we just graduated a lot of kids who are going to some super great colleges, and we have a very high college entering and completion rate, which is one of the things that we think is quite important. If you were to take honors, one way to do it would be having AP courses, which we are very much opposed to. We don't like the pedagogy of AP. We don't have AP. And we have double the national average of students majoring in science, technology, engineering, and math at university. And one of the reasons is because they're not thinking that being a biologist means memorizing 2,000 words, which is like what you do for an AP exam. Instead, they're doing field work, and you'll see a lot of examples of that. And when they're doing that type of field work and research, they say, oh, that's what biologists do. That could be me. I want to do that. But we knew we needed to have a weighted average. So how would we deal with the weighted average? By weighted average, to get into selective colleges, including University of California, which is a great public university system, even with the cutbacks. And here's what we worked out with the University of California before we opened. For those courses, let's say Haley is teaching the class, and Rob and I are in the class, and Rob wants to take honors, and I want to take regular. There's a two-tiered syllabus. Everyone grades 6 through 12, every teacher of 6 through 12 posts a syllabus online. Can they deviate from it? Absolutely. Do we have a right to know that you thought it through? Absolutely. So on that syllabus, we'll say, this is what you do for regular, this is what you do for honors, and do you have a 3-week add drop period, because you can't decide at the end of the semester whether the kid did regular or honors, if you're still with me. But basically, the beauty of it is Rob's taking honors, Larry's taking regular, and I'm in the same room with Rob the whole time. I never feel like I'm in the dumb class. 71% of our kids ultimately land up taking honors because I'm sitting there and saying, Rob's a pretty smart guy, but I think this could be me. The whole proposition of a school like this is, this could be you, this could be you. So that's how we dealt with that one. I also just want to say the spirit of change of having you all here really rejuvenates all of us, and we kind of have a lot of things up for grabs all the time, and there's a lot of things you'll probably see here, as Rob said, that you'll wonder, like, why do we do it that way? So this idea of bringing the seeds of change to a school is something that we have been working on for some time, because Rob and I were working in the oldest public high school in the United States, which was begun in the middle of the 1600s. And we worked there for 7 years before we even met in the same building. And in a place like the People's Republic of Cambridge. It's a 5-story building.
And then we met.
And then we met.
Downhill from there.
It's been rapidly, it's still going downhill rapidly ever since. By the way, for people, when he comes to Australia, as his wife Judy once said, 1 beer he's laughing, 2 beers he's crying, 3 beers he's sleeping. Just remember that. So what happened was, we had a 5-story building, and we had a separate building called the Arts Building. And here's what happened, even in a very progressive place like Cambridge, Massachusetts. We had a supposition about the way everything was, and we realized it was true. The kids with the highest socioeconomic status we broke it up into 6 small schools, because it was a huge school. The kids with the highest socioeconomic status, families were on the top floor. The next highest was the 4th floor, the school on the 4th. The next was the 3rd, the next was the 2nd, the next was the 1st, where I taught carpentry. He was on the 5th, by the way, okay? And then in the arts building, which was adjacent, but it had a catwalk like this at the 2nd floor, just like this, that's how they were connected. That's where the Salvadorans, the Haitians, the Cape Verdeans, the Ethiopians and the Eritreans, all of whom did not speak each other's languages, were all housed, and I mean housed, and they called that building, they didn't call it the arts building, they called it the island. So Rob and I tried to desegregate that building and failed. And we were there for quite some time. And then but we still hadn't met, because I actually was still a lawyer and was teaching carpentry and got a call from this place called the Harvard Center for Law and Education, which was begun in 1969 to represent low-income students and parents' rights in the 50 states and territories. And actually, for those of you who know various statutes, basically Paul Wegstein did most of Title I, Kathy Downey did most of EHA, which is now IDEA, and they changed the name from Education and Handicap because hand and cap, and Kathy's put many things in there, and Sheila Jackson worked on the education provisions of the McKinney Homelessness Act, and they needed somebody to work on the Perkins Act, which comes from 1917, which is the Vogt Act. I'm teaching carpentry, I'm very happy, I loved it. Paul Wegstein called me up. We said, hey, 300 lawyers applied to be here, and you didn't, but we really want you to help us work on reauthorizing the Perkins Act. I said, I don't want it, not interested. And he called me back and called me back and called me back. And I finally decided to do it. I'm not sure quite why, but it was interesting in a way. We did get to change a federal law. We eliminated language from 1917 which said that voc ed was for non-baccalaureate occupations. I want to say something about that. And we eliminated the language which said that voc ed was supposed to be segregated from academic education. Actually, it did say that. So in terms of high-tech high, you will see that the integration of technical and academic pursuits pervades everything that you're going to see here. As far as the former one, this question about non-baccalaureate occupations. Does anybody here know a job that you can get with a high school diploma? There aren't any. There are jobs that you can get that you don't need a college degree for, and those jobs you don't need a high school diploma for either. So we have a hypothesis here, and I have a lot of colleagues back in Cambridge State who disagree with it, even progressive folks, which is, this is that everyone doesn't need to go to college. Well, maybe so, and ultimately a lot won't, but my argumentum ad hominem thing I must point out, everyone's always talking about other people's children whenever they say that in the last 35 years I've ever heard it. And secondly, our hypothesis is that those kids who ultimately might not go to college are better off if they're not being segregated from those who are, and programs that expect that they might be. So we had a boy we have student speakers at the graduations, not adults. We had a boy who talked about coming over from Mexico on Saturday. He came over from Mexico when he was 7, and one kid here said, I'm not here illegally, they put the border on the other side of me. By the way, this was stolen. This was stolen from Mexico in 1850. There's no question about that, right? And then a friend of mine from the federal government, anyone go to the Chula Vista schools, by the way? Yeah, you should. There's something absolutely magical down there, and it's right near the Olympic Training Center, and right behind the schools are the looming mountains of Mexico. It's just absolutely gorgeous there. And a friend of mine who works for the Fed said, you should find a way for the kids from Mexico to get into your school. And I said, they already have. Okay, so where was I? I lost my thread. So in terms of this question of voc academic integration was number one. And the thing about college is, so what the boy said the other day was that when he came when he was 7, he lived his father was a utility man on a golf course, and he and his family lived in a utility shack on a golf course in San Diego for most of his years. What was more poignant, in a way, even, was a boy who's being raised by his older sister in National City, which is a very low-income neighborhood near here, and there was no one else in his family, and she had not gone to college, and she had a very low-level service worker job, and she put him in the lottery without his knowledge, and here he was graduating on Saturday and going to college. And he told her he was not going to come, and she said, you have to go, and they went back and forth, and we have a day for kids in the spring where they can, if they get in the lottery, they can spend a day here to kind of try it. And she made a deal with him, this is what he told us, that if he came for that one day, then he could decide either way. So he happened to come to his classroom in this building, Jill Giardini's class, it turned out, I found out. And when he was in the class, he was basically trying to hide and very, very shy and didn't feel comfortable about his English anyway. And they were talking about something, and I don't know what it was, and then the teacher turned to him and said, what do you think? And he kind of jumped, and he looked out at everybody, like 800 people, and said, that was the first time in my life anybody ever asked me what I thought. So I decided to stay. So this question of moving from didacticism to inquiry is another key element of what we're about. When we met in Cambridge and we wanted to try to fix that school, we wanted to change the schedule. And I remember meeting with 16 teachers, and somebody said, we can't change the schedule won't let us. It took me 6 years to realize that he was right. We had a 7-period day with a 7-day rotating schedule. So the MIT kids who wanted to help on Tuesday afternoons, every 7th Tuesday they were working with the same kids. It was really a pre-Copernican relationship to the outside world. But when we did, so the most important thing to do is to have people be meeting. We can't create and recreate this school without people meeting. I don't think there's any secret sauce to do anything in your schools without adults actually having time collegially working with each other and talking. And so we do a lot of it, and our meetings happen before school for just about everybody. There are other meetings as well, for a very simple reason, which is another thing that we've seen, is that when you randomly assign people meetings at first period, or in the middle of early in the morning before school, or in the middle of the day, or in the afternoon, and try that in your schools, you will find something really, really striking. The people who meet before school start get so much more work done than the people who meet after school or during the day. Because the people after school are really, really tired for very good reason, and the people who meet in the middle of the day are talking about what already went wrong, and for some reason about the way we're all wired, people who meet in the morning are able to talk about 2 years from now. So that's an important piece. And we created ground rules, which is that you can improve, you can criticize anything that anybody says as long as you make a positive affirmative statement that improves upon it, right? So you can't just say, no, right, okay? That was, and there are several of those. I want to talk quickly about 2 other things. Well, I still have a few minutes. When we ran around the country, Rob and I then left. We left because, when I was principal of the high school, I didn't want the PA system to ever be used. Because, I mean, it's not just what you put in a school, it's what you don't let in a school. When you have a PA system in a big high school, it feels like a bus station. Will Mary please come to the main office? I mean, really, you just interrupted all these, if anybody's taught on that, Mary will make it to the main office, all right, you know? And so think about, I think as much as we're all learning from each other about what you want to put in that you might not be having, I want you to spend as much time thinking about what you no longer need, because there's a lot of those things that you basically don't need, and that was basically that was one of them. And so you take different pieces from each other. So there was a movie called Chan is Missing.
Tell us about the dead people.
The dead. So I didn't let it be used. I did not let the PA system be used, and there was an older student who had been around when the PA system was used, and there were younger students that had never heard it. And one day, it was towards the end of my time there, this former principal actually came back and got on and said, I'd like a moment of silence for the dearly departed and recently beloved Mary Maloney, secretary in the main office,
from 1948 to 1973, and I want to remind students that it's snowing outside, and under Massachusetts law, it is a 2-day suspension for throwing snowballs. So, and we were going, oh. I walked out in the hallway, and there was an older student who'd heard it before, and the younger student was going like, and the younger student said, "What's that?" And the older student said, "Oh, that's the dude that announces the dead people." So it's not just what you put in, it's what you don't let in. So Chan is missing. So John Woo is now a mainstream director who's made some really great films, and an early film that he made, Black and White, was right around the time that Rob and I were running around the country. It was called Chan is Missing. Great documentary about a young Chinese American in San Francisco whose Uncle Chan does not come home, as I recall, on Friday night, and he spends the weekend anxiously going around San Francisco looking for Uncle Chan, whom he never finds. But he goes around, and in having conversations where Chan might be, you get this exquisite, multifaceted view of an immigrant Chinese American gentleman and without meeting him, because if we had met him, it would have been reduced. And so I called that my talk at that time when we ran around the country, The American High School is Missing, and it's still missing. So there's a piece you might get from here, and there's the pieces that we'll get from you, but we're all basically making a mosaic to figure out what kinds of American high schools we really basically would like to have. And I also dropped another story, thanks for that thread, which was when I was talking the other day, because there's so much nativism going on, especially in this community, and I wanted to say something because there are so many immigrant families there, and I talked about how anxious I was being there, coming in here at the last second with my kids. Why was I coming to this strange place? And remembering my mother coming over pregnant on a troop ship, knowing nobody. I mean, and you saw it, all the grandmas were all crying in the audience. I don't want them to cry, but I wanted them to feel like we understand this is the type of place where you can feel safe. This is an island for you. Dualisms. I think in terms of dualisms, all or some. One of the classes that I teach at the ed school is about the history, which I also taught at Harvard for 5 years, about the history of public education in the United States. And I have a hypothesis, which is basically that almost every time there's been a policy intervention for some, it's been to the disadvantage of that some, if not to the all. Okay? So, all or some. Simple and complex. It's easy to make the simple complicated. True genius lies in making the complex simple. As one jazz great once said, and Sir Giovanni said, simple structures beget complex behaviors. Complex structures beget simple behaviors. So a big comprehensive high school is very complex structure, so the kids walk on lines. This used to be a military base. There's a lot of parents who come here and actually start walking in a straight line again just because they have a Navy flashback. This was 500 acres that the Navy got in 1899 from the city, and in 1999, when we were looking for buildings, they gave it back. So this is how we got it. So keeping it simple makes kids do more sophisticated things. So we try to avoid making a rule, but rather just thinking, okay, I'll go out on the edge with this one. Hold on a second. We had Chip Heath. Chip Heath, he's at Stanford. He's at the business school, and his brother's at Harvard, I guess. They wrote a book on stickiness. Yeah, anybody read the book on stickiness? Stickiness, eyeballs and stuff like that. And I have a little list of things that make things basically. Here's what's sticky. To make something be sticky is something that you would that it's a good idea to have things be sticky. Okay, to be sticky, it must be simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotive, and a story. So he wanted to know, he'd heard about how we do honors and non-honors, and for this book he's writing, and he wanted to know what percent of kids, and that's when I sent Laura McBain an email, who's here, and I said, what percent of kids? That's how I knew 71% of kids ultimately went on. He wanted to know how sticky it was. And before he left, I said, I gotta tell you something we just did because so it wouldn't be sticky. He said, what? I said, we just did something so it wouldn't be sticky. It was in the fall. A little edgy thing to share, but basically we have somebody who self-identifies as a female in the 8th grade with her parents' support, and is anatomically a male. And so it was in the beginning of the year, and she was in the middle school, and 2 parents complained that their daughters felt uncomfortable with her being in the girls' bathroom. We doubted that their daughters felt uncomfortable. We knew that they felt uncomfortable. Because these are Navy-built buildings, first of all, we don't segregate adults' bathrooms from kids' bathrooms. Is that a small thing? That's a big thing. Except every building has a small private bathroom, because you know when you're redoing buildings, you don't get rid of plumbing. So, and which kids can use or adults can use. And so some people thought we should have her use a small private bathroom, and the rest of us thought, and we prevailed, no, we should tell those mothers that their daughters can use a small private bathroom, which is exactly what we did, and they never used it, and it wasn't sticky, and the girl could go into the, okay? So that's just that's an example of not creating a rule, but just thinking. Okay, adult learning and student learning. Adult learning and student learning is really just, trying to integrate them. That's why we have a grad school of education. And in fact, the other day, Rob and I we were up at some accrediting agency, and this woman said, "Why do you have a graduate school of education?" And Rob gave a very good answer. And then she said, "But why do you have a graduate school of education?" And Rob tried another answer. And then later on, she said, "I don't get it. I don't know if it's just me, but why do you want to have a graduate school of education?" And that's when I stepped in. I said, the real question is, why does anybody want to go to a graduate school of education? And, that's the real question. And whether it's a good idea or not, there's a lot of people that seem to want to come to us, and they come from all over the world. And so we think that we have a lot to share and learn with them about. So that's why, but that was kind of foreign to the questioner, okay? Heads and hands, carpentry, can't help it. Do we heads and hands at the MIT's motto, mens et manus, head and hand. And the idea of integrating the use of the head and hand, you're going to see evidence of that all over the place. Do it well and describe it well. It's as important, each is as important as the other. What you're doing, you need to describe well for parents, for your community, for the students, to other colleagues, and of course, you need to do it well. Neither one alone is sufficient. Covering and uncovering. You don't just want to cover the material, you want to uncover the material, like fieldwork and research. Perplexity, paradox therapy. I'm very big on paradox therapy. When you go into High-Tech High, the original building, I'm giving it away, but you're going to see a cigarette machine, okay? You're going to see 2 cigarette machines, vending machines, and they're filled with student art and publications. And what I love about that, well, Jeff Robin is this brilliant nutcase teacher who works here, who's a dear friend of mine. Yeah, he really is a nut, and he knows that, and I know that. And he comes in my office one day and says, "You got to go on eBay because I'm buying something." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Shh." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Hurry up." Okay, so we're going on. We're buying a cigarette machine from Tennessee for $200, mid-century. What do we want it for? He said, "Shh, hurry up." Okay, so we bought it. And then a few weeks later, you'll see what's out there. They retooled it, the kids said. They took out cigarettes and put in, buy a piece of High-Tech High art. They took pieces of wood the same size and weight, balsa wood, as cigarette machines, and made paintings on them and loaded up the machine with them. Retooled in the engineering program the whole thing for credit cards and all that kind of stuff. So why is it paradox therapy? Because when people, you don't see cigarette machines anywhere. And when visitors come in, it's really great to see their face when they see a cigarette machine right at the main entrance. They say, "What's this do?" That's the paradoxical part, okay? You got their attention. And then they see that it's a cigarette, they see it's art and it's vending art, and they go, "Oh, that's the therapeutic part," okay? Paradox therapy, it dislodges people's thinking. Stability and change, a good place to sort of wrap it up on. That basically, I think from being in a 350-year-old high school in particular, that parents are way too focused on stability. Even here, people think we're changing things too much. Parents get a little agitated when things get changed. But they're getting used to it. It's kind of a roller coaster ride. But I actually think that stability is, I need financial stability for school, but I think that stability is really something to watch out for. It changes much more compelling. And finally, not that we're Albert Einstein, but for doing what we're doing, it reminded me of something that he once said. It was easy to discover the theory of relativity. All I had to do was ignore a few basic axioms. So I think most of us really need to do is just basically, ignore a few basic axioms. I've got time for a few questions. I'd love to hear some, if anybody has any.
So the struggle the first few years, what were you up against?
The first few years, well, we had parents who thought that this was going to be a traditional school, and it was a brand new, nice buildings, and they thought that they would make it in their image, and we didn't let them, because we'd been there and we'd seen that. We said, no. There's 187 other schools in the district. This is a school of choice. We did compel you to come to an orientation session. And so we don't have a football team. We told you there's not going to be a football team. There's not going to be a football team, right? But there's not going to be homecoming queen either. It's not going to happen, okay? Right, there's a few things like that. But you don't let in. Those were most of it. But then it really quieted down. Well, we had a lot of people that don't like the way we do math. It was really interesting about that. And there's something about math. Parents, like, if my kid's good at math, they're really smart. If they're not good at math, they're not smart. If my kid's good at math, they can do everything. If they're not good at math, they can't do anything. I mean, so we got some really nutty, we have such a nutty math teacher here, Will Haas. It was a student who gave a talk. She gave a talk on Saturday, another student speaker, about Will Haas's math class. She said, Will Haas loves math so much, math doesn't even love math as much as Will Haas loves math. That was kind of good. So that's another issue, is this question about, like, parental anxiety about, is this really going to be okay? And we never invite people to leave, because that's untoward, but you're always flirting with that conversation that they're going to take their kid out in the early going, and then they say, well, we can't leave, and we'd say, oh, how come? I said, and my kid loves coming too much. This is like a problem for people, right? They love coming too much, right? And it's too bad you're not seeing kids here, because what really strikes people the most is how much the kids really own the place, and the amount, having been in a place like, because I know from an epidemiological point of view, I can make a real comparison about the amount of drugs, thefts. We don't have any fights compared to Cambridge. What we have in 11 schools, we have as many kids as the Cambridge Public Schools. I'm not saying this to put down Cambridge. The amount of incidents that we have like that in an entire year were 1 week in Cambridge. And that's because of the kids' basic ownership of it. So then the first piece was the kids really loved coming. The second piece was we started getting our kids into college at far better rates than not only the public schools, but the private schools. So because of what happened to the economy, the people who go to the private schools have been trying to get in much, much more, because why should they be paying all that money every year? So then all of a sudden everybody really wanted to get in. It's like, so the two shoes dropping. The first one was the kids love coming. The second was the colleges love taking the kids that come from here. And my sister is head of admissions of a very selective college on the East Coast, and I've learned a lot from her. And she said that, the way that colleges, they want predictive validity like portfolio managers, and they look at how the kids from the different high schools fared at their university. So that's why we always say to kids when they're going to a certain place, you gotta really, really do well, because they're gonna take more kids from here if you do. So that was the other shoe dropping, was getting kids into top flight schools.
Yep.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about transitions from your elementary to middle and high school, and do you give priority to kids from your elementary to go to your middle, or does everyone have to reapply?
No, yeah, thank you. No, once you're in, you're in. You get to stay. You don't have to reapply.
Yeah.
Yes.
Larry, just with that whole change then over the time for you seeing parents seeing their kids, generations of parents never going to college, and then all of a sudden that's the first kid that's ever gone to college. How did you support those families to sort of deal with the fact that, wow, this kid of mine is going to be the first kid that goes to college and continues on from there? So did the school have in place something to sort of support that process?
That transition for the family? Well, and for the child.
Yeah, and for the child, yeah.
There's a lot of ways that we do that. First of all, the schools are small. And I don't believe in killer apps in a sense, but this is not an application like a computer app. This is as close to a killer app as anything that we do. We've got five high schools among our schools, and every one of them has about 100 kids in it, seniors. At that level. And everyone has a college placement officer, and the killer app is every college placement officer in every one of our schools has two characteristics. The first, they worked in a selective college admissions office for at least 5 years. What does that tell you about them? That tells they get along with people. They know college admissions inside out. They can read, they can write. They go to the NACAC, National Association of College Advice and Counselor, meetings. They know their counterparts who are admissions officers in all those universities. They say about someone. did you know that she saw her mother be killed in front of her when she was 8 years old? Just so when you're reading that, would you please read that very closely? They can make calls like that. Okay, that's the first part. And the second thing, all 5 of them are the first member of their family to go to college. So if someone has those 2 characteristics, I can almost hire them sight unseen. So that's one critical way.
Yeah.
The other way is we have something called advisory groups. I've got one. 3 of my advisees just graduated. Jesus did, and you did, and Emily did. I'm going to really miss them. And I've got 15 advisees, and we meet with them weekly, and we do home visits of every single one of them. So we know their families, and in particular, the main part of that advisory group is their grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. So the 9th graders are watching, otherwise what access would they have? They're watching 11th graders go through the most measured year of an entire human being's life. Right? They're watching the 12th graders apply to college and go through who am I, where am I going, how do I can't believe this, right? You know what I mean? And go through all those issues. And then when Ryan, who got a free ride to Stanford, came back, the first place he wanted to come to was the advisory group. And if you were in the advisory group that day, you would hear the kids saying, so when you're in the dormitory, do you just hang out with kids from San Diego? That's a question like, could this be me question?
Yeah.
So the advisory group gets to see you doing that. In fact, I gave Jesus and my 3 graduates, I have them write a statement to themselves, the first advisory group in their freshman year, and I give it to them when they're crossing the stage to get their diploma. So there's a lot of things like that that we do. And Rob is giving me the high sign. One more question? Yeah.
You mentioned you had challenges at your school, your previous school, and then you rebuilt a school to achieve success. And is there any recommendations or suggestions that you would have for schools that can't rebuild? Have you seen success?
Yeah, well, by rebuild, I don't mean physically rebuild. You mean about changing school?
Yeah, like moving locations and like you left your school. And
right.
Started from
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, we had some success in part of the school, actually, and it was rebuilt because we had 2 schools, okay, that were united. We have the Latin school, which is from the 1650s, and we had Ringe Tech, which is the oldest vocational school in the United States from 1888. By the way, under a bequest from Frederick Ringe for a manual training school for boys of average talents and strong physiques, Rob and me. So, in case you haven't noticed, by the way, Rob is a hunk. See? Yeah, as a matter of fact, 27.
I didn't know.
Yeah. How many of you run? 27? 25 marathons later, he really is. So yeah, we took Ringe Tech and totally transformed it. And one of the ways that we transformed it is we started getting kids into college. And one of the ways we started doing it is the kids in our internship program started to have a higher college entering rate than the kids from the academic school. So then when I went to a cocktail party once with a mother who was an architect and her husband was a lawyer, she was in the academic side of the school because we couldn't integrate them. She was trying to get her kid into Rob's Polaroid internship program. Okay, so that's a way to do it. I don't know if you're following me, but here's an example. I have a family member whom I adore, who's 90 years old and lives in Biloxi, Mississippi, and is a very progressive integrationist and an elementary school teacher. And she had an ice cream stand in Mississippi at the height of everything that was going on in the 60s. And you had to have separate water fountains for blacks and whites. So she had cold water, refrigerated water for blacks, and non-refrigerated water for the whites. Okay? And I always think of that as an image. So the white people, if they wanted to go over, they could go over, but they had to go over. But the black folk already had it. And that's kind of what we did with Ringe Tech. We made refrigerated water over here for the have-nots. And then if other people want to come over, they can try to get in. That's not, I don't know. I'm sure you're talking about a lot more than that, but I'm just sharing. That was a challenge that we had, but that's a longer answer I'd have to give you. Thanks, everybody, for putting up with this one.
Thanks, Larry. Every time I hear Larry speak, I learn something new myself. In fact, every time he speaks, I learn something new about myself that I haven't heard before.
Just remember, even people that make things up don't make everything up.
Right. Okay, so.